Welcome back, everybody. Today's lesson is going to be on glazing, specifically glazing flesh tones. And I'm going to give you two different examples from two different character perspectives. We are going to begin with this Tika figure from Dragonlance, but before we get to her, let's once again go over exactly what is glazing. Glazing is similar to layering, however, the purpose and the opacity of the paint is different. With layering, we may thin the paint about 1 to 3, 1 to 4 paint to water, and we build up layers until we get an opaque surface on our miniature. Glazing is much, much thinner. We're talking 1 to 8, 1 to 10. Basically, you want to be working with colored water. Once we have our glaze properly thinned, we wipe the brush a couple times on a paper towel, just like with layering, and we proceed to start glazing our miniature. Two things to keep in mind with glazing. First of all, as you apply the glaze, that first layer, it's a good thing if you do not see any results. Glazing should be a very subtle thing. It's a nice way to add little bits of color here and there, in this case in your skin tones. It's not meant to completely cover the surface area, so after 2 or 3 coats you should start seeing that color come through. Second thing to keep in mind, this is not a wash. As you drag your brush across the miniature, you should have a nice smooth stroke without a bunch of excess water coming out of the bristles. If you have that happen, then you need to wipe on your paper towel a few more times. Same thing with layering again, but in this case, because there's so much water in the brush, you do have to wipe back and forth a few times until you get the right consistency on your brush. Now for this particular figure, I started off with flat brown, and you can break up glazing when it comes to skin into 3 sections. The shade glazes, the base coat glazes, and your highlight glazes. In this case, I'm working on my secondary shadow, so that shadow right below the base coat, adding a little bit more brown to the skin tone with our flat brown. There's a bit of red in that color as well, and very slowly building up the colors. The process that you're seeing right now is about 3 layers total. I'm cutting around, kind of speeding it up a little bit. As you can see, very subtle changes. Basically, you can't see it on camera. Again, want to do this very slowly, so don't rush it and try to put a whole bunch on to get fast results. That's not the point of glazing. You want subtle transitions, little hints of color. Around this time, we put about 3 glazes, and we're just starting to see some of the results. This is a very subtle glaze we're starting off with. We'll use ones that have a bit more color in them later on. One thing I want to point out here is that this is a figure of Tika from Dragonlance. And if you're not familiar with Dragonlance, she's basically a barmaid and reluctant warrior. So when you're painting characters like this, or glazing them in this case, you want to keep that character in mind. So she's a barmaid, going to have fairly pale skin from working indoors and at night most of the time. Not going to be a tan warrior like a grizzled veteran from many campaigns. So as we go through this process, I am keeping that in mind, and I'm going to glaze her appropriately. For our next glaze, I'm adding some red violet to our flat brown, and this is our deepest shade glaze. And again, because of the nature of this figure, I don't want a whole lot of violet color in the recesses for Tika here. Just wouldn't be appropriate. But I do want a little bit more color in the shadows. So I'm just doing about 1 or 2 coats of this. The colors you use for glazes can vary quite a bit. My skin tones always are based off of reds, so violet is a natural color here to use. You can use blues or even sometimes greens. It really depends on whatever your skin tone base colors are. Next, we are moving on to our base coat glaze, and for this I am using red leather. Red leather is a very good glaze if you want to add a suntan to your figures. Now again, Tika, don't want to give her a very deep tan. However, I did want to give something to the base coat, so just a single glaze of this in the base coat region. So I can go over the shade here. That's fine if I accidentally do that, but I'm mainly concentrating on the base coat and trying to avoid the shade and definitely avoiding the highlight areas. Our last glaze is going to be for our highlights, and for that I'm using Game Color Gory Red. And this is my favorite color to use for highlight glazing because it adds a real warmth to the figure, makes the figure look much more alive if you have some rosy cheeks and a little bit of red in the nose especially. This also works well on areas like the knees, the elbows, and the knuckles, but here I'm going to show you the face and all 3 layers of glazing. I want you to slowly see the color build up. We just put on the first coat, and now here is the second coat being applied. You can see with the second coat the color really starts coming through, and aim for the tip of the nose and just under the high cheekbone area for that warmth to the face. And then the third and final glaze, you can see 3 coats here, how subtle the color is. That's how you know if you have your glazing right. It has to be built up until you get a very subtle color effect. Again, if you put on a glaze and it becomes bright red after the first coat, well then your glaze is way too thick. You got to thin it down more. After the gory red, I should have been done with the glazes, but I decided to go back to our deepest shadow because I decided, you know what, I can use a little bit more color there, a little bit less brown. So I broke out the evil red, and which is kind of a dark reddish purple color, and just added a little bit more color in those deep shadows. And because these layers are so transparent, I can put it right over that previous glaze just to add a little bit more color. It's not like layering or I have to go back and repaint anything. Just splashes of colors, a variety of skin really makes skin come alive. For example number 2, we are going to be glazing Karamon. Now Karamon is a veteran warrior, so he's out in the sun all the time. He's going to have much more tan skin. Also, we got a lot more bulging muscles here, so we have a lot more areas where we can add glazes. Again, starting off with the secondary shade area, and here I'm using Hull Red. On Tika, I used flat brown because I wanted a little bit more brown, less red on her. Here, I think we can go a little bit more extreme with our red color, but same process as before, building up the color, 2 or 3 coats depending on exactly the results that we achieve with each coat. For our deepest shades, a mix of Hexed Lichen and Stormy Blue. Again, going for a much darker color combination than what we used on Tika. Now with a color combination like this, you can go really extreme with this and put a lot of this color on, give a lot of vibrancy to the shades and shadows of your miniatures. However, my painting technique has always strived for realism and not that kind of extreme contrast that a lot of people favor nowadays. But if you prefer that, you can go much more extreme. I could have put the purple and drawn that out to more of the base coat areas so it covered a larger surface. However, that's just not my style. For our base coat and partially our highlight area, using a mix of Beastie Brown and Parasite Brown. So this is adding more of a tan to our skin with this orange-brown mixture I have here. And I'm applying 1 coat to the highlight areas, but the base coat area I'm doing 2 coats. So the base coat is going to get more of that tan color. I don't want to hit the highlight areas too many times because the more glazes I put on those areas, the darker they're going to get and more akin in color to the base coat. Therefore, we're going to lose our highlights. So we don't want to do too much at this stage. And then finally, the highlight glaze, once again gory red, and I'm so glad I had that footage earlier of Tika doing the face because I have a lovely focus right on my knuckle here. Now, while it is the same color, I am putting a little bit less of the gory red on here. I think I did just 2 coats as opposed to 3 on Tika. Because we have that tan skin, the red doesn't pick up as well. If I put on too many, his face is going to look flush rather than lively. So because of the browns we put on, just want to be a little bit more subtle with this color. I am, however, spreading it out a little bit more. Again, just a single coat and a few of the highlights because I thought his skin was still looking just a little bit too over highlighted, a bit too pale here and there. So a single glaze of gory red is all we need to add that warmth to the skin, especially to the highlights. And there we go, glazing all done. Now, I do want to remind you that glazing is a subtle thing. It's meant to add hints of color. So you may be looking at this right now and saying, I don't see much. That's kind of the point, though admittedly on the video here, the glazing, the subtle color changes shows up a little bit less than it does in real life. And with glazing, we managed to take a skin tone. It works especially well with skin tones because without glazing, these two figures would look like kind of like a Barbie doll with the same monochromatic skin tone over the entire surface. But skin is not like that. You have blood underneath, there's warmth showing through, you have different variations in color depending on your elbows or your palms or other parts of your body, little freckles and whatnot. And you can add all that characteristics into your skin via glazing. And while we are focusing on skin in this video, which I think is the most important thing to glaze on a miniature, especially a large scale miniature like this, you can employ this on anything, cloth, armor, what have you, but skin is definitely the most important. So give glazing a try. It's a very forgiving painting technique because the paint is so transparent. If you put one brushstroke in the wrong place, it's not really going to matter. You have to build that color up. Just remember 2 things. Use colored water, not thinned paint. And also you want to put the glaze on in a nice, smooth, even coat. If you do a brush stroke and there's a little blob of water on the miniature, you have too much on the brush, go back to your paper towel, give it a wipe a few times until you get a nice, even coat. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.
The whole point of having a dragon is to tell the world you have a dragon. Why did you keep it a secret?